on. Welcome everybody to our Tuesday evening Torah study and chat with two rabbis. Tonight we have with us our Rabbi Barry Silver of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor, and we are delighted to have as our guest tonight Rabbi Solomon Rothstein. And take it away, gentlemen.
Okay, it's my privilege to welcome Rabbi Solomon Rothstein. He is colloquially known as Rabbi to the Stars. He's also the official rabbi over at, or unofficial rabbi over at Mar-a-Lago. He's got a long and illustrious career. He's performed life cycle events, weddings and things for some of the most famous people around. And we are most fortunate to have him as our guest to share with us some thoughts that he has about Yom Kippur, and also to tell us a little bit about his background, how he became a rabbi, and anything else that he would like to share with us. So Rabbi Rothstein, take it away.
Thank you very much. And it's a privilege to be able to speak to all of you, especially to be able to share something with Rabbi Silver. We moved to Florida in 2001, and his name became very prominent even then, and I feel very privileged to know him and to learn from his wisdom as well. Well, this is a very, I'm going to be 95 years old in June. So I've seen a lot. I've experienced a lot. And I'm just shocked by what's happening here in this country. You know, Republicans and Democrats always fought with one another, but not with the same sense of vengeance. And it's terrible what's happening. Perhaps you saw that bit of news yesterday of a college campus where one of the students decided they had American flags all over the place, each flag representing one of the people who were murdered in 9/11. This young man was going around picking up the flags and throwing them into garbage bags.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's for a student at school to do that. I remember many, many years ago when the Second World War, just before the Second World War started, because I lived through the Depression. And I remember the great privilege in elementary school of being able to carry the American flag down the aisle, and all the students arose and they said the Pledge of Allegiance, and they sang the proper song. Today, I mean, there are some schools that won't even permit something like that anymore, won't even permit the Star Spangled Banner to be sung anymore. It's awful. It's awful, and it's frightening. And why? But before we try to answer the question why, what is what I'm saying to you now? What does that have to do with Yom Kippur? Well, you remember there are many ways of saying Yom Kippur. One of them is Day of Atonement. You take the word atonement and you break it down. You're at one. At one with whom? You're at one with your God. On Rosh Hashanah, we were busy talking about the world, its creation, and how we can take all the minuses in our lives and change them to pluses. And it's on Yom Kippur that we visit with God, and he says, well, have you made any changes in those minuses to pluses? And what are you going to be doing about tomorrow? Yom Kippur is all about each and every one of us and the God who created us. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. Atonement means being at one with God. Now, I have to tell you, in Judaism, there is a Yiddish expression, das pintele Yid. What does that mean? Pintele Yid. Ever hear that terminology?
Yeah.
Any of you ever hear it?
Yep.
Well, of course, you heard everything. But pintele is even smaller than a period. It's something that's in each and every one of us. Each and every one of us has this pintele yid that never really leaves us, and we never really know it exists. Let me tell you what happened to me. Once upon a time, I was a rabbi in Fort Lee, New Jersey. That's before moving to California. I was a rabbi there for 29 years, and I built up the congregation. And the pintele yid had a lot to do with my feelings about what happens to us. I had a family that I knew lived in Manhattan, and the only way they observed Yom Kippur, they figured they have to observe it because someone once said that if all the calendars in the world disappeared, we would still be able to find out just when Yom Kippur arrives because it's so important to us. Well, there was this family in New York. The only way they observed any of the holidays, especially Yom Kippur, was to put on the TV and watch the Rockettes. They like to watch the Rockettes on Kol Nidre night because there's some sort of a Jewish song that's played, and they identified with that song and the holiday as well. But that was the extent of their observance of the holiday. Well, there was a father and a mother and two daughters. One of the daughters was a very famous photographer and reporter for Life magazine. I don't think Life magazine is around anymore. And she was given an assignment to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral and to do pictures and the story of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Well, she went in there and she did her work. And towards the end of the day, she was tired and she sat down and she was awe-inspired by that chapel and the candles that were all aglow. And she sat there, her eyes closed, not quite understanding what was going on. Now, one of the major priests who had been working with her during the course of her taking all the pictures, he sat down next to her and he said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I don't know." Then he proceeded to talk about Catholicism, of how it can enter your life and change your life in the process. She was impressed with the structure. She was impressed with the sanctuary. She was impressed with the priest, and she started taking lessons with him and became a Roman Catholic. Well, time passed. I kept in touch with this family, and the father died, and we were doing a graveside funeral service out on the island. And I gathered his wife and his two daughters around me, and I pinned them with the Shiva ribbon, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And I wanted to make the bracha, but one of the daughters refused to take the ribbon. She just kind of told me not to do it, and she whispered, "I'm a Catholic." Well, we did the service. I spoke with the father, the kind of father he was, the kind of husband he was, etc. The usual service that a rabbi would do at a time like that. And then we all left. And I'm walking back to the car. I'm looking over my shoulder. I see that this woman, this girl, is still standing at the graveside and watching them fill it in. So I immediately returned back. I said, "What's the matter?" She had tears in her eyes. She said, "I don't know." I said, "What do you mean you don't know?" She said, "I can't move. My legs won't move. I'm stuck here at the graveside." I said, "You think maybe you want to say the Kaddish because you refused to say it with your sister?" She said, "Yes." She said the Kaddish with me. She then was able to move went back to her car, and returned to Judaism. There's something inside each and every one of us. Das pintele, and das pintele made her kind of choose to say the Kaddish and want to return to her religion. And that's what this holiday is all about. It's about reminding us that each and every one of us has a pintele yid.
Rabbi Rothstein,
yes.
That's a beautiful story you told. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on why so many people have trouble getting in touch with that pintele yid today, that so many Jewish people seem to be alienated from their Jewish nishama. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's one of the challenges facing the Jewish community. It's there. But we have to do everything in our power to draw their attention to what's inside of them, and they choose not to talk about it. We talk about everything else. But das pintele yid, we just...
So what is it that
Rabbi
we're doing?
Silver, that's one of the biggest challenges that we all face.
What is it that you think we're doing wrong? And how do you think we can reach that point within
what
every
we're doing
person?
wrong is that we're looking in the wrong direction. We're emphasizing the wrong thing. And well, that's something that tonight, I'm thinking of the Marranos. The Marranos were people who were forced to become Christians. And they were forced to make sure that on Friday night, there were no candles lit or anything like that, so that they would quickly forget who they were and what's expected of them. And the story is told of one of them who on Kol Nidre night, and she knew when it was Kol Nidre because her neighbors some of them were Jewish. And she took down the cross, and behind the cross, she had a Jewish star. And she went down to the basement where she would light the candles. She didn't know what she was doing. All she knew is that there's something inside of her that's Jewish. And if the world finds out, she will be going to the L'Dor Va-Dor. Rabbi Silver, if I knew the correct answer to that question, but this is the biggest challenge that we face as Jews. We have children who go to college, and the professors are so liberal that they have no feeling about Judaism. They have no feeling about Israel. I feel that every Jewish child should go to Israel on one of those, what do you call it?
Birthright. They go on birthright.
One of those birthrights. They go to Israel on the birthright, they come back a different person. Well, we've got to have birthrights for their parents. That's what we need in order to be able to accomplish what I'm referring to. That's what we need in order to be able to accomplish it.
Well, Rabbi, I think you've identified the problem by your question, in that we fail to excite the Jewish neshama and to kindle that spark of Judaism because we're talking about other peripheral
everything
things.
Else.
Right.
Everything else.
We're not
everything else. And we fail to recognize how very special we are. That's
right.
pintele makes it very special. I think of the story, when the canal was constructed between England and France, the country put out bids, and they had tremendous bids from so many different construction companies because this was a big endeavor. Well, all of a sudden they got a bid that was so small, so tiny, they couldn't understand who would submit this kind of bid. You can't build that kind of a tunnel. So they looked at the address. They went to that part of London where you had many Jewish families living, and they went to the address that was on the bid. They went upstairs, and inside one of the offices, sitting behind a desk, was a man by the name of Goldberg, and the bid was submitted by Goldberg and Feinberg. Feinberg evidently was on the road. So they came in and they said, Mr. Goldberg, the same. Did you submit this bid? I did. Mr. Goldberg, this bid is tiny. How can you, isn't a low bid good? Yes, it's good. But how can you possibly construct a tunnel with funds that won't even pay for the construction equipment? He said, what kind of equipment? I stand on the English side. Feinberg stands on the French side. I start digging from my side. He starts digging from his side. And when we meet, you've got a tunnel. But Mr. Goldberg, what happens if you don't meet? Then you have two tunnels. We are a very special people, and we never believed in the word impossible. And that's what has to happen today, Rabbi Silver. I mean, they say it's impossible. The kids are so far removed from Judaism. It's impossible getting people to even go to services anymore. It's impossible. It's not impossible. Das pintele exists in each and every one of us. And we need to find the mechanism for helping them to discover what it is. And part of that mechanism, of course, is Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre. But how do you get them into shul for Kol Nidre? Let me tell you something. I discovered das pintele when I was in the army. Let me tell you how I discovered it and how I became a rabbi in the process. Because I grew up in the Bronx. We were a very poor family. My father had passed away when I was 13 years old. And I remember going to synagogue at Stuyvesant High School to say Kaddish for him. And that was 6:30 in the morning, so I could say Kaddish and then go to class. And at the end of the service, you got a saltine cracker and some whiskey that they made in their bathtub. It was quite an experience for me that I'll never forget. Well, I grew up in the Bronx, and my mother was determined that I'd become an engineer. So I went to City College at night and to study mechanical engineering. And then one day in June, when I reached my birthday, I get a letter. And before I knew it, in August, I was in the Army. And I was being processed in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And they asked me, can you drive? I said, no, I can't drive. We couldn't afford a car. And so what the Army did, they made me into a tank driver. At age 18, I was driving a tank. That's where the national deficit started, because I was a terrible tank driver, I think. Well, anyway, I came from a very religious home, and I would go to chapel every Friday night, and I was very happy to go to chapel on Friday night because the girls would come in from Louisville, Kentucky, and they'd bring salami sandwiches, and it was a nice experience. Well, I go to services, and the rabbi there, the chaplain there, knew me, and he had an assistant as well. And what happened was, for months, I was driving tanks, going to synagogue on Friday night. And the next day, I was due to ship out to Korea because the war was finally over and it was heating up in Korea. The chaplain calls me into the office the night before, and he said, Saul, my assistant is leaving. How would you like to become my assistant? I said, what does that mean? I'm supposed to leave for Korea tomorrow. And you know, if you're in a tank and you're hit by fire, you're toast. So he said to me, you won't be able to go tomorrow. I'll see to that. I said, let me call my mother and see what she says about that. Well, anyway, I agreed to become his assistant. But all the while in my mind, the day I get out of the Army, I'm going back to City College and become an engineer. But I was very much impressed with this fellow. His name was Wolf Gunther Plaut, a Reform rabbi who really mystified me because I wasn't used to Reform rabbis. I was used to the old guys with the beards and the shtreimel and the very orthodox kind of a environment. And I was mesmerized. I just sat there listening to him and then watching the way he would counsel people. But still, I was going to become an engineer. Well, one day he calls me in the office. That's after months of working with him, and the two civilians standing there. He said, Saul, in another month, I'm leaving. There's not going to be anyone to replace me. I said, so you're going to replace me? I said, what? I'm just about 19 now. What do you mean replace you? You're going to become the chaplain. There's no chaplain to replace me, I'm told, he said to me, for at least another year and a half. So you're going to have to serve as a chaplain. I'll try to help you as best as I can during the next month before I leave. But once I'm gone, and I said, who are these two civilians here? These are people from the Jewish Federation. We used to call them the Jewish Welfare Board. And they will endorse you as a chaplain, even though you weren't formally ordained. I said, okay, what does that mean? He says, what it means is that as soon as I leave, you'll become the chaplain. You're no longer a sergeant. You'll now become a first lieutenant. And you'll change your living quarters as well. So I said, let me call my mother and see what she says about that. Well, anyway, he left. He tried to help me as much as he could before he left. And that night, when I was all alone, I get a call that there is a Jewish serviceman who was crushed under a tank. You got to give him last rites. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but as Jews, did you know we have last rites? Did you know that?
Yeah. Yes.
I know you know it. Well, we call that vidui. So I remember going out to do the last rites with him, and my legs were like rubber. Well, that was me, a new chaplain, in that position that I really didn't deserve. And you can imagine what my sermon was like on Friday night. And you can imagine what kind of advice I would give to a master sergeant who would come to my office and tell me about some of the problems that he's having with his wife. Well, I served as a chaplain month after month. And when I was going into the second year of my chaplaincy, I was sitting in the office and I said to myself, as if a bell went on, the lights went on. Something was speaking to me. I was just pintele. It said to me, you can do it, Saul. You can become a rabbi. So when I was able to, I went into Louisville, Kentucky. I went to speak to the Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform rabbis to find out more about their particular doctrine. And I decided, well, I want to become a conservative rabbi. And so when I went home on leave 1 month, I said, Ma, I got news for you. She said, what? You want to become a rabbi? She said, what? That's no job for a Jewish boy. I mean, all she could think about are these fellows, because we had on our street, you'd have one little synagogue after another, and you would have a lot of ultra-religious people walking up and down. And she didn't want me to do that. I said, Ma, you don't understand. It's not what you think. I want to become a rabbi. So the next day, I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary of America because I decided I want to become a conservative rabbi. I went there, spoke to the registrar, a guy who eventually, his name was Bernie Mandelbaum, who eventually became the chancellor. And I told him the story of my life, that I want to become a rabbi. He said, how old are you? Aren't you already a rabbi? I can see from your insignia, I can see from uniform that and I explained to him, no, I'm not really a rabbi. I'm a chaplain because the army needed me. He said, forget it. You're too old. You're 19 years old. You can't become a rabbi. Go back to the army, and when you graduate, just go ahead and study engineering. And I had a letter from Rabbi Plaut to show him, who felt that, and in the letter he said that I have the capability of becoming a rabbi. He said, it's too late. There's nothing you can do. I was brokenhearted. I mean, what do you mean there's nothing I can do? I said, there's something that can, see, those years, you couldn't become a rabbi as readily as you can in these days. Well, anyway, he said, I got an idea. Go over to Yeshiva University. There they have a rabbinical school. There they have a college. You can go to both of them and become a rabbi. And then when you finish there, you can come here if you still want to become a conservative rabbi, because you can never pass the entrance exam. And this is a graduate school besides. You need to get the background that they would give you. So I go to Yeshiva University. I asked to speak to the president, a man by the name of Samuel Belkin. I ushered into his office, and he looks at me. He says, you are a rabbi. I don't understand. I went through the same thing again. He says, forget it. Nothing I can do for you. Nothing. You're too old. You know what that sentence was doing to me, tearing me apart? I was determined I want to be a rabbi. He says, you're too old. So walking through the lobby on my way out with tears in my eyes, I passed by an office called Beit Medrash Lamorim, Teachers Institute. I didn't want to become a teacher, but there was something that pulled me into the office. I asked to speak to the dean. They ushered me into an office, a little old man sitting behind a huge desk with Parkinson's. He's sitting there, and I'm in uniform. I tell him the story, and he starts to cry. You're going to become a rabbi, and I'll make sure of that. I found out thereafter that this little old man with Parkinson's sitting behind a huge desk was the power behind Yeshiva University. He said, this is what I want you to do. Don't give up on your dream, because your dream can come true. Go back to the army, read as much as you can, study as much as you can. And when you come out, you come to see me and we'll get started. So I did precisely that. And approximately 7 months later, I was discharged and I went to see him. And of course, he remembered me. And he said to me, this is what I want you to do. You are to study morning, noon, and night. I'm going to give you tutors for each subject that you've got to become familiar with. I said, I can't afford tutors. I know I got the GI Bill of Rights, but I need that to help my mother. He said, there's a woman in New York who's very philanthropic. She's going to sponsor you. So I did that. I came to see him and he set up a whole program for me. He says, but one thing you got to promise me, You're going to study for a whole year. You're not to go to the college, not to go anywhere. It's just to study morning, noon, and night. And you got to promise me you're not going to date any girls. Well, every Yom Kippur, I give myself an extra push over here because I didn't quite follow his instructions. Well, he gave me the tutors. I studied morning, noon, and night, sometimes with a date here and there. And then when I was finished, he said, when you come back to me, you're not to talk to me in English, only talk to me in Hebrew. I came back to him, I rehearsed what I was going to say to him, and he said, this is what I want you to do. Now, I want you to start the college at night. The Yeshiva University College started late in the afternoon and went through to the evening. Start the college, and I want you to start the Teachers Institute in the morning. I said, but I don't want to be a teacher. He said, you need that in order to be able to get the entrance exam to get into the yeshiva rabbinical school. So you'll go through the Teachers Institute. You'll start out with Gimel, which is for high school kids. You go to Dalet, you go to Hey, you go to Vav, and then when you finish, then you're going to go for your entrance exam. So I did exactly what he said. I studied with the tutors, morning, noon, and night. I went to the college. I studied in the Beit Midrash Lamorim, and then he took me by the hand for the exam. And the exam in those days was given by a Rosh Yeshiva, by one of the big rabbis from the rabbinical school. That was the only exam. And the exam was given in Yiddish. But fortunately, my parents spoke Yiddish and I knew Yiddish. So he took me by the hand, brought me in to see the rabbi for the exam. And the rabbi looked at him, is that his son or something? He didn't quite figure that one out. I took the exam, I passed the exam, I went to yeshiva, I went to the college, I passed everything. When I finished the rabbinical school and the college, I went to the seminary, I took their entrance exam, and I studied for another 6 years in order to become a conservative rabbi. And the day that I was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, I was already married. I already had 3 kids and one on the way.
I guess you didn't obey the rule about not dating. Anyway, that's a fascinating story. I'm glad that you decided to persevere because you became a great rabbi. And those people who told you that you were too old, I wish they were here now to see that you're nearing 95 and you're still not too old to be a rabbi. So that's a good thing. Now, I do want to also try to answer one of your questions about why is it that it's so hard to discern that pintele yid these days. And the answer to that question happens to be in our Torah reading for this Shabbat, interestingly enough. So I think you discovered it, Saul, because you had a mentor. Rabbi Plaut was one of the greatest icons of the rabbinate ever to grace America that you learned from. And you also had a desire to study. And once you study, you start learning all the beauties of our tradition. But this passage tells us perhaps why it is that this pintele yid that you're talking about is so hard to discover in America today. What happens in the Torah passage is Moses is predicting the future. And he says to the people, God was with your ancestors and they felt his presence. But you're going to go into this land and you're going to have it good. You're going to have everything you want. You're going to be prosperous and you're going to have all the food you need and you're going to have wealth and riches. And once you have all of that, you're going to forget. You're going to forget who you are. You're going to forget where all this came from. And you're going to forget that this is not all you're doing, that there's a power greater than you that you should be grateful. You're going to forget all about that. And once you forget that, you've then lost your Judaism and you're going to forget everything and then you will be lost. And I think that's what we see in our society today. There are people who materially have what they need and they forget, because they have their materials needs met, they forget who they are, where they came from, and the expression of appreciation for that. What I call that is self-imposed identity theft. And I will be talking about that on Yom Kippur. We forget our own identity as Jews, and it's self-imposed, but it's not strictly self-imposed, because the world has always tried to make us forget who we are. Sometimes they did it by extermination. Sometimes they would do it by trying to make fun of Jewish people or to ostracize us. Or they might take another religion and say, this is the new religion. Your religion is passé. It's the Old Testament, and we forget who we are. We start looking at ourselves through the eyes of others. And I think what we need to do as Jews is to reclaim our identity as a people with a purpose, a people that has a mission, people that has a goal to make this world a better place, and a people that is destined to try to bring this voice, this call from beyond to humanity to see that we're all created special and unique. We need to reclaim our identity, and then that pintele will grow within us.
Yeah, you know, the problem today in our country is that so many don't even claim their identity as Americans.
That's true.
Let alone as Jews.
That's true.
I mean, they're coming up with all kinds of fanciful terms, all of which to help them forget who they are as Americans and what's expected of us as Americans. And the same thing applies to us as Jews. Now, are we out of time?
No, we're going to open it up there. Everybody else is supposed to ask questions and make comments. So yeah, you can make a brief.
I'm not quite finished. I just want
to. You can make a brief comment. And then we're opening up to everybody else.
I'll make a brief comment. There's not only das pintele inside of us, but there's also a hand that moves us. There's very little that happens to us in life by accident. And I discovered that very early in my career. I discovered that when I was walking through the lobby, and there was a hand that moved me into that office. But when one day, sitting in the office in Fort Lee, New Jersey, my secretary comes, she says, I got a crazy man out there. He wants to join the congregation, but he doesn't have a check. And he wrote a check on a piece of toilet paper. She hands me a sheet of toilet paper. She says, what do I do with this? I take a look at it and sign Buddy Hackett. That was Buddy Hackett's way. You all are familiar with Buddy Hackett, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's how we became very, very friendly, very close to one another. And it was through Buddy Hackett that I moved to California, where I became the rabbi to the stars for 20 years. And that was quite an experience to be standing in the pulpit and you look out. I mean, in the front row is Aaron Spelling, and right behind him is Kirk Douglas, Michael Douglas, and Buddy Hackett, and all the famous
Rabbi Rothstein, were you able to hack it? All right.
Yeah,
now, who has a question? Who has a question or a comment for Rabbi Rothstein? Anybody out there? We're opening it up to the audience. Valerie, go ahead.
Okay, so Congregation L'Dor Rabbi Sol has a kind of a different take on a lot of the religious dogma that has been taught throughout the ages, whereas we feel more, and how we feel more spiritual rather than there is a supreme power, that the power is actually within us, the power is with nature, the power is within the miracles that happen. So my question to you is how do you feel about the fact that a lot of Jews don't believe that there is a supernatural being directing us, but that there is a consciousness, a collective consciousness that we really have to tap into, as opposed to a supreme omnipotent being?
Well,
can you accept that? How do you feel about that?
Well, someone can say to me, I have no religion, thank God, and deny that there is anything beyond the grave, because there is no God in Olam Haba, and there is no God really here. And how do you deal with people like that? You deal with them by accepting them for who they are at that moment. You know, you can write on a slip of paper, I believe in the one and only God, and put it in your pocket. And then you reach into another pocket and there's one that says, no, there is no God. You go through life through phases. One phase, you believe strongly there's another God. And in another phase, because of things that are happening to you or to others, you believe there cannot be a God, that God died on the gallows, on the gallows in the concentration camps or in the gas chambers. They're all there's nothing that makes you into a bad Jew. The only thing that makes you into a bad Jew is when you step out of the Jewish community, when you separate yourself completely. As long as you can keep someone in the community, there's always an opportunity, both from your side and from the other person's side as well, to continue to believe. Listen, I've sat at bedsides watching someone die, and that person was an atheist, but the last minute, when you remind him that you're not alone, that God will not separate himself from you when you die, and he believes it. You know, we go through all of these phases. We cannot reject anybody because of their belief system. We can reject them because their belief system has nothing to do with the Jewish community. You do not separate, al tifrosh min hatzibur, don't separate yourself from your community. And we got a lot of Jews today who do. And you got to win them back. The only way to win them back.
I'd like to comment on Rabbi Rothstein's response. I think what he's saying is very important in that we have Jewish people who have many different beliefs about a lot of things, including who wrote the Torah and God and what it means to be Jewish. But what he's stressing is of utmost importance, that we must learn to see all of us as brothers and part of the Jewish community, and not build up walls and separate because we have doctrinal differences about the deity or about other things, because we're too small a group and have too important a mission in order to divide ourselves up among factions. So what Rabbi Rothstein is talking about is Kalal Yisrael Hatzibur, is seeing the Jewish people as one. Now, what Barry says is true. We have a particular philosophy at L'Dor Va-Dor. There's Orthodox, there's Reform, there's Humanist, there's Reconstructionist. And I think on this Yom Kippur, we might atone for the divisions within the community of Jews and try to work together and engage in dialogue. Not just say, well, I don't agree with you, I don't like you, but let's engage in dialogue about what God's all about, what our duties are about, what it means to be Jewish. And let's, even though we disagree, let's consider ourselves part of one group. And the same thing's true for America. Even if we're different parties or different philosophies, let's join together as Americans and do what's necessary to help America. That's the point that he's bringing out. That's an important point that you're raising. Anybody else?
We forgot how to do that. You know, when the Torah is being read, you're supposed to have three people standing up there when the Torah is being read. Why? Because God, Israel, and God, the state of Israel, and the Jewish people are one. And they have to feel the sense of oneness that we don't feel anymore. We can have a sense of oneness, even though the other person is Reform and I'm Orthodox or whatever. But the Jew always knew you should not separate yourself from your fellow Jews, because the moment you do, you weaken the link and we're easily destroyed.
Yep, that's what happened in Roman times. The Jews fought each other before the Romans ever even invaded. But I think to join together, people need to have a common goal. So if your goal is just for your political party to gain power, then you're not going to be able to work together. But if your goal is to bring out the best in America, or to bring out the best in the Jewish people, or to unite as Jews to improve the world, then your goal is big enough to unite people instead of divide people. Do we have anyone else who would like to share some thoughts or comments or questions for Rabbi Rothstein,
Gloria,
the rabbi to the stars?
go ahead, Gloria.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, Rabbi, I want to tell you that you made me feel wonderful because a couple things. You're very charming, number one. And number two is I felt wonderful listening to you recount all your stories that probably made you feel good. And I just wanted to comment that I am so glad that our rabbi invited you. So that's my comment.
you're
Thank
so
you very
sweet
much,
of you to
Gloria.
say that. Thank you, dear. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
You're welcome.
Gloria is one of the raging grannies. This is the first time I heard her speak where she wasn't raging about anything. She was just complimenting. So that was very nice.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
your
you.
normal troublemaker.
There you go.
But I
Next
behave
week,
myself.
Rabbi Rothstein brought out the calmness in you and the spirituality. All
Yeah.
right. Anybody else want to share some thoughts? All right. Then Rabbi Rothstein, tell us one of the more interesting weddings that you've done in your life.
One of the most interesting weddings that I've done. Oh, God. Yeah. I did a wedding. This is when I was in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where when I was interviewing the bride and groom before the wedding, they were already arguing with one another. And I turned to them and I said, "Are you sure you want to get married?" They said, yeah. Well, the guy comes late to his own wedding and he's drunk and he's fooling around under the chuppah. And I whispered to him, "If you don't cut this out, I'm going to stop this wedding." Well, I pronounce him husband and wife. I invite him to kiss his bride. He bends over to kiss his bride and he throws up all over her.
Right.
And he proceeds to pass out. When he wakes up, the bride is gone, and the wedding is in all. That's a terrible kind of experience. I've had all kinds of wonderful experiences, and but this is one that I'll always remember, because people, what people fail to realize is that when you have a wedding, long after the sound of the music is a faint memory and the taste of the roast beef is already gone, the only thing that remains is the ceremony. And so when people get married, they should make sure that they have a ceremony that's really a testimony to their love.
Yeah.
A ceremony that people will always remember. And that's something else that brides and grooms are so busy worrying about the flowers and stuff like this.
Yeah.
They forget about how important the ceremony is.
That is very, very important. And actually, that bride was very lucky that happened, because she found out before it was too late what type of guy this was. That was a very lucky thing for her, because if it happened a week later, she already would have been married. So that's a great story. And I agree with you, Rabbi Rothstein, that the wedding ceremony is often overlooked by all the other periphery, and people don't take it seriously. And I can tell as a rabbi, if people are more concerned about the flowers, the food, the photography than they are about the ceremony, I can already tell there's problems. That this marriage is not based on Jewish ideals and principles, it's based on superficial things. And my father always said, a line that I use in every wedding, he said, the word wedding starts with two letters, W-E, which spells we. And then later on, you get to the letter I. If you can keep the we before the I, then you'll have a happy marriage together. And
Beautiful.
another thing I noticed in weddings, sometimes the bride and groom, and I know you've experienced this too, Rabbi Rothstein, sometimes the bride and groom say, this is our wedding. We'll decide what's going to happen. We make all the decisions. And I said, are you going to have the parents under the chuppah? We don't want that. Are you going to have a song that your mother likes? We'll make all the decisions. And I always get bad vibes about that, because in the Jewish tradition, it is not just the bride and groom who are getting married. This is a communal event. The parents raised you, and you should respect your parents. They shouldn't tell you what to do, but you should have respect for them and consider their feelings and their opinions. That's why in the Jewish ceremony, both parents walk the bride down the aisle, not just one. We consider parents to be important, and the parents are standing underneath the chuppah, because yes, the bride and groom are the focus, but the parents and the grandparents and the community is also important.
That's a very good point, because I encourage the parents, especially the mother of the groom, to walk down the aisle with him, because she's giving him away.
Right.
It's so important that she recognize that fact. You see, the mother of the bride, it's a different situation. I'm not losing a daughter. I'm gaining a bathroom. You see, it's a different kind of a relationship. That's why you want to be able to have them walk down the aisle. Absolutely.
Very good. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions? Go ahead, Valerie.
Well, Rabbi Roth, it's very interesting that I was brought up in an Orthodox temple. Okay, there were many areas of that particular type of an upbringing that I really needed to walk away from. I actually worked with Buddy Hackett for over a year in Las Vegas. I'm a singer, and I actually worked with him in Las Vegas, so I know Buddy Hackett. I knew Buddy Hackett quite well. Being a rabbi out in California, they are extraordinarily liberal out there. And I'm sure that you have had instances where, because we have recently gone to a very close friends of ours, and it was a same-sex wedding. It was two women. They both walked down the aisles in wedding gowns. They were under a chuppah. They took all their vows in the Jewish faith. So my question to you is, as a conservative rabbi out in California, in one of the most liberal places in the entire world, what's your opinion on same-sex marriages in the Jewish religion, or as this in any religion?
Yeah, I've done them. I've done same-sex marriages. Yes, I've officiated at them.
Well, that answers that question.
Yeah.
Very good. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Wendy
Rabbi
has her
Rothstein.
hand
See, let
raised.
me see the mentality you talk about. There was a tremendous difference I discovered between the personalities of the people in California and those in the movie industry compared to citizens back home. It's very different. Listen, I had Catherine Zeta-Jones in my congregation, and I remember one day she walked in late, and I was reading a prayer, and the minute she walked in, I lost my place. I mean, you have some very beautiful people and very talented people, and yet very different. The people, the movie stars in California, unless you constantly tell them how wonderful they are, unless you're constantly complimenting them, they're reaching for the various things to give them a sense of complacency. It's a different world, and it's not a very stable world, not at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wendy. Unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Rabbi. And I'm sure I'm not the first person who's told you how much younger you look than you are. I can't believe you're 95. I found the whole story of every of the way you came to be a rabbi fascinating. I want to ask you two questions. One, why at the age of 19, the other rabbi said you were way too old, and I didn't quite catch how it is you became, quote, the rabbi to the stars.
Yeah. According to Orthodoxy, for example, you should start studying Torah, when you're 4 or 5 years old. So 19 is much too old. How did I get to be the rabbi to the stars? well, you remember I mentioned Buddy Hackett walked into my office and we became very close friends. And every year we would rent Lincoln Center and he'd bring in all of his friends and we'd have a great, for a whole weekend, they would be performing and the money would go to the synagogue, and that was wonderful. But then he went off to California. And it was then that he said to me, come join us. I've got a great congregation for you. And I said, no, I'm not going to leave Fort Lee because I have life tenure here. I built this congregation.
Mm.
And I said, no, I'm not going to go to California. And one Saturday morning, one Shabbos morning, he walks in together with, what was the other comedian? Well, I forget his name right now. And I invite them over to the house after the service. And in 15 minutes, they got me to agree. And we went to California. I left the congregation. That's
Did
how
you
I
feel
wound
like
up.
did you feel like Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies when he went out there? A little out of place, like all these movie stars and stuff like that.
That's
like
an
a-
incredible, I just have to say that story about the wedding. I'm not going to forget that one, to be able to repeat to people, because that's incredible. That's a very
I
strange.
encourage brides and grooms never to drink before the ceremony. Never to drink with them.
I guess after that experience, I would give them that advice also.
Well, I can see if some people who are used to having, a couple a day because of their nerves have one or two, if that's what their norm is. But obviously, this guy had a heck of a lot more.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. He was
Mm.
drunk.
Wow.
He was
Wow.
drunk.
I had a ceremony once, not quite as dramatic as Rabbi Rothstein, where there were a lot of lights and it was very hot. And the person hadn't been drinking, but the groom just collapsed under the lights. And then he came back and I had a little while to think of a line. So I said to the bride, you can see that he's really fallen for you. And then we resumed the ceremony as if nothing happened. But I had a lot of time to think of a line to use when he came back to. I had about 5 minutes. So I figured I'd put the time to good use. But that's not quite as dramatic as Rabbi Rothstein's story.
No,
The
no.
one thing I feel bad about is that I can't be in the same room with all of you. You're a wonderful group, and I feel privileged just before the holiday to have been able to look at you and speak with you. And I wish each and every one of you, together with your families, may you have a wonderful holiday and a great year in which all your dreams will come true, and that God will bless you all. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for inviting me. I
Thank you.
appreciate it greatly.
Rabbi
Thank you.
Rothstein, you've been a pleasure and a delight. It's our honor and privilege to have you here. And I think that you succeeded in bringing out that pintele in every person here and kindling that spark. And this will be recorded. And so I'm hoping that other people who didn't get to see this will be able to see it in the future. For now, we will all give you a virtual hug, standing for humanity's unending goodness, which we share with you. And before too long, we will be with you in person. We will have live services, and I'd love to have you officiate or co-officiate and share some more of your wisdom with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for the honor.
God bless you
Yes.
all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Thank
shalom,
you,
everyone.
Rabbi.
See ya.
Shabbat
Have a
shalom.
good week, and Lashana Tova. See you all later.
Yes.
Take care,
Yes.
Rabbi.
Shana Tova. Thank you.
Shana Tova.